Hello there, and welcome once again to Rebuilding the Collection, or Jazz Labours Loved and Lost in Lockdown. I'm Paul Palmer. Once again, you join us as we deliberate over which of my jazz albums on cassette tape should be converted to digital immortality, and which of them should be ground into powder and thrust into the nearest ocean, no doubt for the delectation of the resident marine life. I jest, of course, but actually that does make me think, what would happen to my cassettes if they were trashed, thrown in the bin? They'd probably end up at the bottom of some kind of ocean. I hope not. Anyway, this is a sometimes slow process if the last video is anything to go by, where we spent all the time discussing the G albums, Giant Steps and the Golden Flute, leaving us no time for the H's I had lined up for that occasion. And assisting me from down the line from Houston, Texas, is the man in no way responsible for this slow process, Mr. Eric Blackman. Hi, Eric. How you doing?
Hey, Paul, how you doing? I was just thinking about climate change when you were speaking to what might happen to all these plastics.
Yeah.
Inevitably, whether we get rid of our albums or not, where are all these plastics going to go?
Maybe our viewer should perhaps get in touch and give us a few ideas about how we could safely dispose of this rubbish. And maybe we don't want to see it, some turtle ingesting it. It's a serious point. So, as I already alluded to, we didn't get time to do the H's that I put aside for the last video. So we're going to do them in this show. There's only 3 of them, and here's what they are. Eric Dolphy, Here and There, and that came out on Prestige in 1966. Freddie Hubbard, a strange one here to Stay. I mean, not the album is lovely, but it's recorded in 1962, but didn't see the light of day till 1976, and that was on the Blue Note label. And finally, we are going to discuss Anthony Davis, James Newton, Hidden Voices, and that came out a lot later, actually, Indian Navigation, 1979. Well, what do you think of those that pared down list from last time then, Eric?
I like this list. Dolphy really sets me off then.
Really?
Yeah, from when I first heard Dolphy, I was coming from like tonal music and classical music and Beethoven and Schubert and Schumann and Brahms and so on and so forth. Then I get into jazz. Then I get into Cannonball Adderley because he had, as an alto player, such a rich, lush sound, such a, what's the word for it? Thoroughly attractive, enticing, pulling you in away with jazz. With the saxophone, he sounds so joyous on Kind of Blue. Coltrane is somber. Coltrane is heavy. Cannonball Adderley is joyous, and Dolphy sounds to me. I interpret him he evokes nihilism. I mean, it's like when I was a kid and my parents dragged me to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I saw all this abstract art, and I thought, "Are you serious?" Abstract. Okay, art. Why?
I guess we had almost like the equivalent, things like the pile of bricks in the Tate art gallery, and or a totally empty toilet. What's this all about? And are you likening Dolphy to this sort of thing?
Well, as an instrumentalist, I think that Dolphy's at the very least fascinating because he gets around the instruments in such spectacular ways. On an Oliver Nelson album, Blues and the Abstract Truth, alongside of Oliver Nelson, he sounds spectacularly chaotic. And I always wondered as a kid, when I got briefly exposed to Dolphy, how it is that he was in the 12-tone system able to come up with every next wrong note after every next wrong note after every next wrong note, and never settle on any right note, um, so-called.
Yeah.
How does he do that?
I think there's an element of how on earth does he get away with it?
But then came the free jazz movement, and jokes aside, that free jazz was called free jazz because no one would pay to hear it, and so on and so forth. It came the sensible discussions about from musicians that we find freedom in structures, and the 12-tone system itself provides finite choices, not infinite choices. But Dolphy seems, when he's playing to me, that he's still insistent that there are infinite choices, that things aren't finite. He sounds like he's from outer space. He sounds, Miles Davis said something to the effect, so we're told that Dolphy sounds like, when you hear Dolphy, you feel like someone's stepping on your toes or something, and putting all their weight upon your toes at the very least. It's a little bit like, when I speak to people, I'm such a contrarian. Dolphy sounds like a contrarian, dedicated jazz contrarian, to me, perhaps too dedicated a jazz contrarian.
I think before we go on, I should say a little bit about this album, here and there. Although I was enjoying your description of Dolphy, largely because he was pushed on me as a flute player, and people said, you must listen to this flute player Eric Dolphy, and I did, and I played some of his transcriptions. But anyway, we'll speak a bit more about that later. Let's just say what's on this album. Status Seeking is kind of an up-tempo swing number where I think we described Dolphy as gliding over the top. Really, does he pay much reference to the chord changes? I don't know. You can make your own mind up. But God Bless the Child is an extended bass clarinet solo. He's completely on his own. Here, playing on this one on bass clarinet. April Fool is a flute number. GW is a quartet, I think. Don't Blame Me is another flute number which is in a quartet form, and is live on that one. There's a couple of live numbers. I think Status Seeking is live. So, any tracks you want to speak about in particular on there? Status Seeking, what's that like?
I have to listen to it, quite honestly, again. On my mind, when you posed the question, was instantly God Bless the Child. I love that kind of thing because it fascinates me to no end that in jazz we can do the kind of thing that Bach did with his cello suites and so much of his other music, a cappella, tell a story, create time, pulse, harmony, context, we evolve things sensibly, and I think it puts an extra burden but points of gratification upon the performer when we do this kind of thing well. Not even a bass player walking along to give us some sort of context. It truly evokes for me the whole notion of what music is. Silence is the canvas that we all paint on.
Yeah, I quite like Don't Blame Me. He plays flute on this. There's a bass and it's a quartet, but the piano doesn't come in until he's played the head, and then he starts soloing. He solos at sort of 90 miles an hour a lot of the time. There are gaps and pauses where he doesn't well, doesn't play anything. But when he does, he piles in like a pile driver or some
Yeah.
musical version of a pile driver. And I'm just wondering whether the tuning is absolutely as it should be. He sounds sharp in a lot of places to me. And having said that, I've liked the form. I like the way this is played. Uh, so I mean, it's a reasonable track. Again, who am I? Who we're taking on Dolphy. We shouldn't really be doing this, but it's kind of like a 5-year-old in playground, doing something naughty. It's stealing someone's lunch or something. I don't know.
That's very good metaphor. I agree with that. That's very good. Yeah.
So, I don't know about Dolphy. I don't know about this one. I'm not sure. I'm going to put it in the collection. I'm
You
not
know
sure.
why I keep things? I keep things like this because what if someone comes over? Of course, I'm wondering, given the pandemic, if someone will ever come over again. Nonetheless, what if someone comes over? Sometimes I keep some of these things because someone will kind of go through my collection, a fellow musician or just a jazz fan or a musician or both. Um, they'll go through it and it does something for them. And so it's doing something for them, does something for me in that
Oh,
moment. They think, oh yeah, he's got this, and
the jazz altruist.
something like that. Yes.
Yeah, I think we've better move on because we've said a lot about Dolphy, and let's talk about Freddie Hubbard's "Here to Stay" album, recorded in 1962, and it wasn't, funnily enough, not released until 1976. So I've no idea why they Blue Note took this decision to hold back this album for so long. But it's very reminiscent, I should say, in sound to an album which we have discussed in an earlier video, Eric, called Caravan.
Yes.
That's because a lot of the personnel are actually in the Jazz Messengers. Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, obviously. Wayne Shorter, tenor saxophone. I think Cedar Walton was. And Reggie Workman. Obviously not Philly Joe Jones, who replaces Art Blakey on drums. So the sound is very sort of that sort of period and style of the Jazz Messengers at that time. And I don't know. I quite like this album. I don't know what you think of it, actually, Eric. What are your views?
The only Freddie albums that I've discarded from my own collection are this kind of a disco fusionish stuff. I think there were some CTI things,
Yeah,
but before and after, it's like he came to his senses. This was before all of that.
yeah,
So Here to Stay, to me, is an attractive title because I'm drawn to it. I want to know why he wouldn't have stayed. Looms Large is the whole trumpet chronology from Louis Armstrong, Roy Eldridge, Miles Davis, and so many others. Lee Morgan was around at this time and making a lot of waves. Then along came Freddie Hubbard, who, as soon as I think of Freddie Hubbard, I think of a trumpet player who is finally playing the trumpet in jazz in a very untrumpet-like way.
yeah, yeah.
He's weaving in and out and playing these lines at will, changing direction at will, in a very saxophonistic way. And Freddie just sounds so fluid all the time. His tone is an alternative to Dizzy Gillespie. It's an alternative to Miles Davis. And when you first see him, his kind of swagger and body language while playing the trumpet, to me, is beautiful. It's relaxed and it's boisterous, it's braggadocious, it's
Spraggadocious.
braggadocious.
Ah, braggadocious. Well, I'm still none the wiser. What does that actually mean?
His posture, his way of moving and playing the trumpet it's just, Dizzy used to really stand still and Roy Eldridge while playing. Miles used to be just, standing still in front of the microphone through the
Yeah.
60s at
Oh, I
this
see.
time to date. And
He's moving
Freddie's kind of
about.
Freddie's loose. Freddie's moving around. Freddie has the moves of a heavyweight boxer. He's going to the side to side. He's giving it an uppercut, and
Yeah.
it was a new visual. It was a new visual from a trumpet player for
I'll just
me.
talk about some of these tracks. We've got something called filet mignon, which is a pun on the dish, I guess. Filet mignon, which is a kind of it's kind of steak, or part of meat, isn't it? It's a cut of meat, a filet mignon. But this is a tribute to Philly Joe Jones, by Hubbard. So there's that, and that's a very fast one. We spoke earlier. I think it sounded very sort of Giant Stepsy, and he's playing very fast on it. Then there's a kind of bossa style piece called Father and Son, and then two different styles of composition. I think Nostrum Fulton is from Hubbard himself. And then I've missed out Body and Soul. Of course, he does a lovely solo on that particular tune, standard. So it's a really good rendition of that particular classic.
I'm glad you mentioned Body and Soul because I've other Freddie albums where he also does Body and Soul, and each time he brings a spectacular display of musical knowledge, jazz history, and his own loose, fluid trumpet style to it, in a way in which he hadn't on a previous recording.
Right. Yeah, the last track is Assunta. And this one is it's funny that the trumpet's playing over scales, going up and down from the rest of the instrumental. It's quite odd, not odd, but unusual technique. But it's quite an interesting track. So overall, first of all, what is the standout track? I think possibly it's got to be Body and Soul. Although I quite like Father and Son. Did you have a favourite?
Body and Soul. Now's a good moment for me to just express my firm belief that if one track on an album or cassette tape or CD so grabs you, and it's so wonderful, for me, it's enough reason to keep the album. I'm going to wish that there was a second or more track, but one is going to be enough, because I can lose myself in one track this year and presume that a few years from now I'll lose myself in that same track again, because some years ago I lost myself in that same track.
Yeah. Okay, so I think what we're saying is we're going to keep this into the collection. I will, into our mythical collection, and I think we move on to Anthony Davis and James Newton. It's called the Anthony Davis James Newton Quartet, but I think there are 5 people playing, so they've got a guest trombonist. It's an interesting album, I have to say. It's Hidden Voices, came out in India Navigation in 1979. What can we say about this? I don't know if you've heard it all, Eric.
There's that one track that I really love. I think it's inventive. I think it tells a story. I think the flute playing is wonderful. I think
Yeah,
the textures are
uh,
spectacular.
yeah. I have to say the Forever Charles, which is the very first track, I think you're referring to, is
Yes,
the most lyrical, and it's genuine
lyrical.
spring.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's a uh, quite an evocative number. The flute playing is very good, and there's the trombone playing in unison with the flute. It blends very well. Then we sort of disintegrate, don't we? We sort of have past lives, which is still recognizable, and it's got a form, but uh, it suddenly becomes, you know, sort of very squeaky, angular. The piano is running across the keyboard in sort of what seems to be random fashion. I think there's form and substance, but there's not a lot of sound that like you want to listen to. And then Hock It in the Pocket, and then the other two, Crystal Text, they all become sort of mishmashes of different compositional styles. It's very free, and I suppose if we were to quote Johnson, it's raucous squawkers from the free jazz caucus, isn't it? And of course, I was quoting not not Samuel, but his more contemporary namesake Boris.
Oh my God.
So, Eric, I'm thinking very much that we want to probably be rid of this one. However, I can't forget the rule which you introduced for the last album.
Ah, yeah, very good.
If if it's got one track on it that you enjoy, and I really did enjoy Forever Charles, and you quite like that one as well,
Yeah.
I think it goes through. The Hubbard and the this one will take through. And you know what? The Eric Dolphy, you kind of liked Body and Soul, didn't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Well, in that case, it's got to go through. So we're taking all into the collection. Well, uh, you'll have noticed there's nothing here from the 21st century or even the 1990s. Bother. I forgot to do this bit of homework uh, because cassette tapes are very much before the CD era. But since we're looking at artists or albums with names alphabetically from beginning of the alphabet, let's take a moment to review more modern offerings beginning with H, which arguably should have been in the collection. And that also reminds me that I didn't ask you about other albums beginning with H that I should have had at the time I was making this original collection. So shall we do everything now? I think you had an H beside you, didn't you?
I do have an age called The Hub of Hubbard, Freddie Hubbard.
Do you know? I'd quite like to listen to that. That probably is a very good one to get a real insight into Harvard again. You know, I mean, not that you don't with Here to Stay, but yeah.
I think what happens with the Hub of Hubbard is 1969. The album was put out in 1972. In any event, right after this album, a year later, he did Red Clay, which is spoken about much more. The Hub of Hubbard attracted me because my teacher, the tenor saxophone player Eddie Daniels, is on the album. And I just had to hear it. Although while studying with Eddie, I did not know at that time that this album even existed.
Yes. Okay. Well, great. That's I'll take that on board. And but I think once again I've failed my own test by not including an album from a more modern times, certainly in the 21st century, beginning with H. So we're now got to find from E to H modern albums which we really like that are from the from the 21st century plus. So we'll have to do our homework on that, Eric, I think.
Okay.
Perhaps our viewer will be able to come up with some possible answers for that. What I would say is to our viewer, thanks for being with us today, and I hope you've enjoyed our deliberations. So we've taken all our albums through to the collection, but let me just reiterate: if you have an album, any album beginning with E all the way through to H now that should be in the collection, because we haven't come up with any answers, drop us a line, and also let us know what you've thought of our deliberations today and so far up to now. You can send us a tweet to creationbuild @creationbuild, that's all one word, and you can now email sorry, what did I say? Creation Build. Did I say Creation Build? Completely wrong. No. Collection Build @Collection Build, all one word. And you can now email us at collectionbuild@gmail.com. collectionbuild@gmail.com. Okay, well, that's it. Thanks very much for your contributions once again, Eric, and thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll roll on to some more alphabetical offerings.
Can I say one thing?
You may.
If you have a big house, keep it all.
Okay. Now, come on, you're subverting the whole reason for this show. Besides, let's face it, not everyone's got a big house. I live in a place where not everyone's got a house, so come on. Yeah, so we'll roll on to some new alphabetical offerings next time. We'll see you then. Thanks to Eric once again, and I'm Paul Palmer.